Good afternoon, welcome to Culture Night. My name is Ros Spencer and I'm here today at the Blackwater Valley Makers in Fermoy, where my exhibition Narcissus is currently on show. So today I'm going to be talking about the work on show here. Hopefully it will give a little bit more of an insight into the meaning behind the work, and I'll also be talking about who my influences have been. But first I would like to take this opportunity to thank a few people and organisations. I think as an emerging artist, it's a huge advantage to be offered a solo exhibition. So I'd like to thank first and foremost the Blackwater Valley Makers. And from the group, I especially would like to thank Siobhan Steele and Susie O'Sullivan for their support. Also Ger Harris for helping me with my promotional material, and Molly Ellis and Lorna MacDonald for their excellent PR. For technical support, I'm indebted to Bob Spencer and Patrick Walsh. And huge thanks also to Vincent Flynn and Dave Clark at the Avondhu Blackwater Valley Partnerships for logistics. To Myfanwy Hughes and the Echo newspaper, and also the Avondhu newspaper for featuring me in their papers recently. And finally, I'd like to thank all of my friends for their patience and their unwavering support. With special thanks to the O'Keefe family for so many things, to Christian Elscholtz for helping me with the installation of the show, and to a special mentions to Sinead Barrett for filming, editing, and helping to keep me on the tracks. Really, I thank every one of you, because without your help, this show wouldn't be complete. In my work, I'm interested in confronting anthropocentric activity, focusing mainly on our complex relationship with animals. Reoccurring themes within my work address speciesism, the manipulation and objectification of animals, and trauma and empathy. The term speciesism was introduced during the 1970s by the English philosopher Richard Ryder. It refers to the disparity of treatment or moral consideration of individuals based on their species. It is a discrimination that involves treating members of one species as morally more important than members of another species in the context of individuals having similar interests. So, for example, we love our companion animals, our dogs, our cats, horses, etc. But other animals such as cows, pigs, and some primates, etc., we treat in a despicable manner, even though all of those animals share a similar interest. I'm interested in how we manipulate animals, altering their appearance through breeding to improve their looks, or through taming, except that those improvements are based on our own ideals and standards, often to the detriment of the animal. And of course we objectify many animals for nefarious reasons, but most commonly we objectify domestic animals as a way of overcoming the paradox of meat and dairy. And what I mean by that is the tension caused from feeling compassion for animals, whilst at the same time enjoying eating meat and consuming dairy. We turn animals into objects by denying them certain characteristics, such as the ability to feel and experience pain, or fear, for example. We may deny that they have cognitive abilities, individual characters, and flexible behaviour. Objectifying animals alleviates the dissonance of the meat and dairy paradox, and thus removes the need for ethical consideration. I'm also interested in how we find a way through our emotions when faced with trauma and death. We know that in our contemporary world, animals are subjected to countless acts of violence that are both culturally and legally approved. Violence that ranges from intensive farming systems to mass extinction because of human activities. Industrialization, domestication, and capitalism have augmented human detachment from animals, arriving at a point where they are perpetually objectified and commonly regarded as commodities for human consumption. And I think this is where my work begins. The installation on show here in Fermoy is called Narcissus. The title refers to the Greco-Roman myth of Narcissus. The myth tells of a young man called Narcissus who falls in love with his own reflection from the pond. He is oblivious to the beauty of the environment that surrounds him, and unaware that he only sees himself. His love goes unrequited, and eventually he perishes through his own innocent, or perhaps ignorant vanity. In this way, I like to think of the work as a flawed kind of mirror in the frustrating attempt of trying to see ourselves. I think we need to understand that we are part of nature and not separate from it, because our failure to recognise or accept our interconnectivity is propelling us towards disaster. As anthropocentric attitudes continue and governments routinely contradict declarations of climate emergency, Mother Nature's wrath intensifies, and this incredible, awe-inspiring planet that we inhabit comes under increased stress. It cannot continue to support life the way we know it. As an artist, I hope to visually communicate my concerns in the hope that my work can open up important discussions and highlight devastating problems, and encourage within the viewer a curiosity for knowledge and truth, and to perhaps urge people to think about the consequences of the choices that they make. So let's talk about Narcissus. The installation comprises of 4 freestanding sculptures and 1 small wall-mounted piece. I'm going to talk you through the individual pieces of the installation, but first I'd like to talk a little bit about materiality. An artist selects materials through careful consideration and suitability to an idea or subject. Materials have agency. They can hold imprinted messages, but all materials are open to transformation through processing. The method of production and the extent to which the process is evident in the work are important aspects of materiality, and whether objects are handmade or manufactured by machine, it can also impact the viewer's experience of it. Aesthetic and emotional experiences can occur during the process of making. A connection evolves between reality, concept, and the artist's imagination as the artwork's material qualities are perceived, interpreted, and understood. Perception can also be influenced by other aspects relating to manufacture, such as the quality and characteristics of refinement and the limitations inherent in the materials. These experiences might first be evoked through the work's visual and physical components, and then subsequently through intellectual engagement and contemplation. But materiality in art extends beyond physical matter. It encompasses all relevant information related to the work's physical existence. This includes an artist's research into concept as well as investigations into the nature of the materials. The artist must fully understand the materials, which means becoming acquainted with their history. Materiality must also consider provenance, the period of production, and the personal history of the artist relevant to the work. In my installation, shed is the dominant piece and usually attracts the most attention. It's a timber frame structure clad in corrugated iron. The design of the shed is based on an old shepherd's hut, and the metal was salvaged from a small farm in Connacht, here in Cork, so as to relate to a more ethical way of farming as opposed to the huge-scale industrial farming. Before industrialisation, we used to live alongside domestic animals. They were part of everyday life. Industrialisation relocated slaughterhouses away from people. When I looked into the etymology of the word shed, I discovered that in Middle English it had meant to divide, and in Old English to separate, and in Latin to split. So this object, the shed, was beginning to look like a perfect structure to fit my concept. So as well as standing as a monument to former, more ethical ways of farming, it equally represents a place of division. Inside the shed, through a slight gap of the open door, the viewer can glimpse a long, uncanny form which dangles from the darkness of the rafters and falls into a tangled heap on the floor. The form ends with the suggestion of a tail, and it intends to flirt with the idea of objection, as the soft, organic material takes on the form of something visceral, intestines or entrails perhaps. It intends to comment on both the objectification of animals and the human inclination for manipulating them. The piece goes beyond representation so that the animal no longer resembles its original form, and the object becomes a combination of nature and culture with multiple interpretations. Cage stack is a welded still sculpture that intends to represent both supermarket trolleys and cages. The empty cages are stacked at tipping point and aim to comment on the unsustainability of intensive farming. And rolling cage is similar to cage stack. Both pieces relate to capitalism and consumerism. And this piece also looks at the rendering of animals. Rendered animals infiltrate into many of our everyday products that we are hardly aware of it. Animal materiality has become one of the most controversial materials in art, and in animal studies it is often criticised. Strong reactions occur when dead animals are visible in the gallery, yet there is minimal disapproval when death is invisible. And we can think about most of the classical paintings. They're made up in part of animal materiality. Rabbit skin's been used since the Renaissance to produce glue, to use as a sizing agent in preparation for the canvas surface to receive oil. So many deaths have often contributed to the making of a painting, and in film and photography, gelatine emulsions are widely used, especially in developing chemicals in analog photography, and in digital photography, inkjet papers are coated with gelatine. That said, I'm not entirely comfortable with my use of animal fur in this piece, because the fur has not been ethically sourced. But perhaps sometimes it's necessary to engage with a subject in a negative way in order to convey a message. I find the use of the animal skin quite poignant on several levels. The physical reality and materiality of death is brought to the foreground. And not only does it speak of animal rendering, it's almost as if the animal's life has only been given meaning because of its death. I also thought the idea of using the animal to trap the animal was quite poignant. And I was really interested in trying to convey a sense of absence within the work, but at the same time creating a presence, to create a space of mourning, I guess. The quiet emptiness of the cages, when combined with traces of animal, perhaps achieves this. I've always tried to avoid graphic representations of animal suffering because I think in an age where society is bombarded with graphic images of violence, suffering, and propaganda, there is a risk of diminishing empathy. Graphic images provided by news channels, newspapers, films, and social media are capable of fostering uncertainty and difficulty in separating facts from fiction, as well as inciting anger and hatred. In her book Regarding the Pain of Others from 2003, Susan Sontag presents an interesting analysis about the desensitization to horrific and disturbing images. You probably can recall the image of 3-year-old Syrian child Alan Kurdi, who was washed up on the beach in Turkey in September in 2015. It's a familiar one, and I think it sticks in all of our minds. But what do we feel when we witness something like this? And equally, what do we feel when we see images of slaughterhouse atrocities and other examples of animal cruelty, especially towards our companion animals? Sontag poses uncomfortable questions about human suffering and the essence of morality and goodness, provoking thoughts about our limitations in sympathy, the nature of violent conflict, and our moral responsibility. And I think these reflections should also be extended to include other non-human animals. Okay, so I seem to have gone off on a tangent a bit there, but I often do when I'm contemplating the plight of animals. So, okay, let's look at the last of the large pieces in the installation. This piece is called Burden. Burden is another word for a bundle. And this piece relates to the burden of the climate crisis, as well as our use of animals as commodities. These are individually and very carefully hand-sewn bundles that have been printed with a mathematical formula. Each bundle has been neatly sewn, tied and stacked to suggest that the rendered animal has more value than the live animal. The mathematical equation was conceived and written by climate change experts and researchers Owen Gaffney and Will Stephan in 2017. The equation relates to the negative impact of human activity in the Anthropocene, and it's broken down like this. So the dE and dt represent the Earth's systems and time. H refers to the human activity and F is the function. The function of the human and a list of arguments, which is A, G and I, where A is the astronomical forcing, gravitational effects from the sun and other planets. G is for the geophysical forcing, i.e. volcanic activity, weathering and tectonic movement. And I represents the internal dynamics, and of which H is actually part of. But according to a mathematical friend of mine, it should also be seen as the likes of natural cycles of ice age,
or the great oxygenation event that occurred 2.4 billion years ago. Before human activity had an impact on Earth, the pre-Anthropocene age, the equation would have been the same but without the zero. The equation suggests that we're killing the Earth. It's both dramatic and disturbing. So that's Narcissus' burden. And finally to the nesting boxes, which seem to have become my signature piece, also appearing in subsequent work. The nesting boxes may be small, but they are no less important than the larger pieces in the installation. They aim to comment on our custodianship of nature and signal towards the disparity of treatment between animals. Perhaps too a subtle suggestion of how we like to control and colonise nature. The boxes have been constructed from pallet wood, quite deliberately and carelessly, with haphazard lumps of wood. The handmade element is crucial throughout the work, to be conscious of human presence and action. For me, during the process of making, aesthetic and emotional experiences can occur. Harmonious or discordant interaction can occur between myself and the material, and I think that's often where the sensitivity of a piece lies. The metal surfaces may appear impassive and cold in comparison to the delicate straps of animal skin, fur, and traces of hair. Just going back to what I was saying about materiality, I'd just like to add that materiality in art extends beyond the physical matter. And I was saying how it encompasses all the relevant information related to the work's physical existence. This includes the artist's research into the concept, as well as investigations into the nature of the materials. An artist should fully understand the materials, which means becoming acquainted with their history. Materiality also considers provenance, as well as a period of production, and the personal history of the artist relevant to the work. In this way, the work becomes very personal. It is often said that all art is in part a self-portrait, and I think that it is true that the artist certainly leaves a part of them within the work. Ultimately, within this work, in confronting the duality of nature and culture and highlighting the disparity of attitudes between species, I aim to disrupt the benign lack of awareness that sustains and enables our comfortable lives.
Okay, so thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the talk. The show is on at the Blackwater Valley Makers, and it's running until the 27th of September, so come down and have a look. Thank you.